Okay, grade 11. I haven't seen you guys for a while. It's been about a week since I have sent you another video. I've sent you a lot of handouts and you should feel a little bit in control of the subject. But unfortunately, and I need to underline this because I went to a meeting yesterday with the head of grade 11 and the head of grade 10 and also the principal of the school, etc. And they all want to know how many of you have been answering the questions. Like every single assignment that I've given you, that there is homework at the end. There's like 3 questions. And to be brutally honest, very few of you, only about a third of you have been answering the questions. And that's not okay, okay? This is a crisis in Vietnam with the coronavirus. The government is being super careful to make sure that the virus is not spread. And you have to do your part, okay? I'm breaking my butt here trying to produce videos so that you don't miss anything. Okay, and that we don't waste time. So if you think that this is a holiday, it's not a holiday. And I'm going to call you out on it when I get back and when we meet again. I'm going to be very clear as to those who have not done their homework. I am supposed to report that to the head of grade 11 and she will pass that on, that information on to the principal. So if you have not been completing your homework or doing what I have instructed after every single video and also the handouts that I've sent you, then you need to start right now, okay? And clear your desk and start from the beginning. And find out exactly what you need to do, because I have a list of the students and I know exactly who has been doing the homework and who is not. And at the moment, I'm not okay. I'm not satisfied with the work that you have been doing. So for that reason, it's important that you start working seriously and get this homework done. Okay, the second bit is that I've been advised, because the grade 11s, you need to be ready for your AS exam, minus the 4 students who have already done it. And I think that there's actually 17 students who have registered for the AS exam. You have actually paid money and everything, so you should be all ready and prepared. This is going to be a slightly shorter video than normal. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a video on preparing for the examination. So what I want you to do now is I want you to open up your books, your workbook, to chapter 11 right at the back of the textbook, and I want you to look at the chapter called Preparing for Exams or Examinations. It's only about 5 or 6 pages long, so it's not gonna hurt you to actually go over slowly exactly what are some of the tricks and some of the skills necessary for you to do well on your final AS exam. We know it's possible to do well on the AS exam because those 4 students have actually succeeded really, really well in November. So if they can do it, you can too. They don't have any more brain cells than you guys do, so you need to make sure that you are ready. Okay, so if you look on page 274, you can see that it starts with an introduction, and it talks a little bit about some of the challenges that you are facing. And the first thing that you are facing is that you have to have some understanding of factual knowledge in economics. And certainly you can't do that without actually having a basic review. You have to have done the work. And we have done the work together. we have done it. So you can't say, oh, I never learned it from the teacher, because you have. In fact, not only have I done it twice, I've done the syllabus twice, but Dr. Remy did it as well. So from, February 2018 to 2019, Dr. Remy was teaching it, and then I actually continued, and I did it twice between February 2019 until now. So there is no excuse for you not having at least the factual content and the knowledge of the subject, okay? So the trick here is to be well organized, okay? You don't have to have an incredible memory. You don't have to have an incredible IQ. You need to be well organized. You need to know exactly what are the topics that are in each chapter. So let's look at the first bit. It says, an understanding of the factual knowledge of economics, a facility for self-expression, not only in writing, but also in using additional aids such as statistics and diagrams where appropriate. I talk about that all the time, that you're going to definitely boost your mark from a C to an A if you know how to use graphs on a regular basis. Okay, the habit of using works of reference as sources of data specific to economics. That means things like, mentioning, by the way, Adam Smith in his book that was written in 1776 called what was it called? The Wealth of Nations, okay, that he said this, okay? That sounds really good to the examiner, that you are actually in control of the subject, or that you know that John Maynard Keynes wrote his famous book, The General Theory, in 1936. And just to have that basic information means that you sound like you know what you're talking about, okay? And that's something pretty fundamental in economics. That's what they're looking for. I know these people because I've worked with them for a number of years. I know exactly what they're really looking for. The habit of reading critically to gain information about the changing economy we live in, well, that's something that we do. If you remember the newspaper articles that I recommend that we do, these are things to encourage and to underline the fact that economics is not just a theoretical subject, but is actually something that we need to know in a very practical term. So when you see an article about something about Vietnam or about Asia or about inflation or about debt or something like that, you should basically send that into the whole class in Google Classroom so that everybody can benefit from it, so everybody can read that article. I've done that about twice, I think, twice or three times on Google Classroom. I've sent you an article that I thought was really, really interesting. You should read it and think about it and tell me, a little bit about why this relates to, to the normal life. That economics is not like, I hate to say the word mathematics, which is a bit of intellectual stimulation, but it's something about the real world, and we can relate to the real world just by reading this type of information about the changing economy that we live in, as they say. An appreciation of the methods of study used by economists and the most effective ways economic data may be analyzed, correlated, discussed, and presented, okay? I've talked about this many times. I said to you, use subject-specific vocabulary, okay? That means that you need to sound like an economist. You don't want to sound like a student. You have to sort of put across that you do understand the subject, and the person marking you who's sitting in a hotel room in Cambridge, he or she doesn't know you, okay? They don't know you at all. So you need to give some very clear signs that you know what you're talking about. And one of the ways is to use vocabulary which is relevant to the topic that you're talking about, okay? We do all those puzzles, those word searches and the crossword puzzles, not just for a game, but that you start picking up these words and using them in your vocabulary just as if it was an ordinary word. They're not ordinary words, and only usually business people or economists or government employees usually know that sort of vocabulary. That's why you need to know it yourself, because when you describe the problem or the solution to the problem in the exam, you need to use that vocabulary. Okay, so they tell you in the next section, studying and revision. Okay, they give you a few tips on how to read through the main material of the book. They tell you not just to sort of try to memorize the book, because of course the examiners have read the book themselves, and so they know what it says, and they will recognize anything that you try to repeat on the final exam. So it would be a very unwise thing to do is to try to memorize a chapter and then basically spill it all out on the big day. Part of the reason for that is that examiners are looking for that. They're actually proactively looking for students who don't really understand the subject, but what they are trying to do is they're saying, well, there's probably a question going to come up about macroeconomics, or maybe there's going to be a question about inflation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to memorize this perfect answer about inflation, and then I'm going to hope, I'm going to pray, maybe even, I'm going to pray that question comes up. And what happens, you slap that one down that you've got memorized, and you say, oh, I'm going to do really well on that question. And then suddenly, when your results come, you end up being very disappointed, because the examiner can see through that very quickly. Because, of course, the question will not be exactly as you prepared for that answer, and that you're kind of giving me an answer, you're giving the examiners an answer that doesn't really fit the question. You're almost trying to adjust the question to your answer, okay? And this is a very dangerous strategy. It brings about issues about memorization and the role of study and what you can do to improve your skills. So no matter how frightened you are or how insecure you are about the final exam and thinking, oh, I'm not able to really, succeed on this exam, the worst strategy you could have is just to memorize, whole paragraphs and then just whack it down on the final exam. So try to understand the topic. If you don't understand the topic, bring it up with the teacher. I'm available all the time, okay? In the morning or at lunchtime or after class, you just, tell me that you'd like to have a little chat about a certain topic, and I'm there for you, okay? I think all your teachers are there for you, so I would definitely be there for you, and certainly last year in grade 12, there were many students who came to me and said, Mr. Leo, I don't understand a word that you said today, so could you go over elasticity one more time? Because I don't understand it. And I did. I stayed with them. I didn't leave the room until I felt that they understood the topic, okay? So if you have certain subjects, certain topics that you're not comfortable with and that you need extra help, don't memorize paragraphs, speak to your teacher, okay, until you feel comfortable with the topic. And then that's how you really shine, and that's what the examiners are looking for. They're looking for a little bit of originality. They're looking for, does the person really understand the point of the question? I mean, I would advise you to read the question about 5 times before you even attempt to answer the question. But examiners are not stupid. You probably think that all adults older than 25 are pretty stupid and we're all naive and we haven't picked up on your tricks about memorizing and then whacking down all this information. We know. We were students ourselves, so we know the fear that comes with writing important exams, and just don't do it. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. You don't want to lose all your marks in one go. There's a little section there on the 3rd page where it's all about a few hints on how to study effectively, and they sort of give you some little bits of advice. What the first one is, put yourself in a position where you can concentrate on your work. This is most unlikely to happen if your favorite television program is on in the same room. These are all things that your mother would probably tell you, really. When reading from this book, make notes on what you have read and incorporate these into your class notes on a particular topic. You will also find it useful to do the self-assessment tasks, writing and working. So in these chapters, there's all sorts of self-assessment. So it kind of helps you to know whether you know what you know, okay? And obviously the homework that I am handing out as well, I'm expecting you to do that. That's not for my entertainment that I actually write out homework questions. I expect you to finish it, okay? The next one is, once you have completed the study of a particular topic, condense your notes and write them on a revision card. That's kind of a clever idea. I used to do that when I was a student. I had these little index cards, and I would have something like PED, price elasticity of demand, and I would have the formula, I would have the definition, and I would have a little example of how it works, okay? And I might have something like, demand pull inflation on another card, and I would that was just my way. I actually found on a personal level that index cards worked for me, okay? Doesn't necessarily gonna work for you, but that is a useful tip that you can actually use, and it might actually work for you. The next section is really dealing with the questions themselves, how to prepare for exam questions. On the next page, it's called examination questions, type of questions. And the three that they make reference to is the multiple choice questions, the data response questions, and the essay questions, okay? Now, in my personal opinion, I would argue that multiple choice questions are actually the most difficult. I mean, you may think, you've got 4 possibilities. I mean, you would certainly be able to recognize one of them. Well, unfortunately, a lot of the answers, if there's like A, B, C, D, quite often they're very similar, and they're only slightly different. And I've actually criticized the Cambridge board for this. I mean, I know the economics advisor for the Cambridge board, and I have written 3 times, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the last 12 years, that 3 times to say that for students whose English is not their first language, it's very unfair to pose a multiple choice question where the answer is really semantically slightly different, okay? In other words, it's incredibly similar, and it's really almost like a game. It's almost like you're trying to make them fail, okay? And we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be trying to, trick the students out into making a mistake. It should be very clear that those 4 choices are going in different directions so that you give the students a fair chance to succeed. Okay, and I think not as much as I would like, but I would say that the 4 answers are more distinct today than they were 10 years ago. So in that sense, you've got it a little bit easier than it was before. I doubt very much that it had much to do with me, but I'm sure that many economics teachers around the world have been complaining about that, particularly teachers who teach in countries where English is not the first language, that you need, or the examiners need, to be sensitive to this struggle that students have with multiple choice questions. So it's very unfair, obviously, if a student is a brilliant economics student but isn't able to distinguish between 2 different choices just because the English is not that clear. So for that reason, I would say the only thing you can do is to try to practice that. I will be giving you practice exams. There are practice exams on the internet. You can Google it. You can just go to Google and say, okay, multiple choice Cambridge AS economics exams, that sort of thing, and they will give you a list of questions to answer, and you can sort of go over them, even with your friends, and say, well, which one do you think is the most correct? Unfortunately, in fact, last year there were about 3 times where these books that are published to help students, when I checked the answer in the book was wrong. And so that's a horrendous thing to do to students, who are trying to improve their skills, to confuse students by actually giving them, wrong answers. So obviously I cannot vouch for every book that's ever been published on multiple choice questions in economics, but on the whole, that should make it easier if you practice multiple choice questions. Okay, what's the next one here? The data response. Data responses, it'll basically case studies. I enjoy that. That's one of my favorite type of questions. They often sort of pose a question about, Mr. and Mrs. Smith who are trying to start up a business, and they're having these sort of problems, and they've got to pay taxes, and they've got to pay their workers, and this is a relationship between revenue and expenses, and and what could they do to improve their business, something like that. So usually what happens is that it's like a little story, and there are key words in the story, and then usually they're going to be asking questions at the bottom related to those key words. So the first thing you should do is you should have one of those highlighter things, which are usually yellow, orange, or green, and highlight the words when you're reading the story, so that you don't have to read the story 10 times to get to the important bits. So highlight the important bits of the story, and then go on and try to answer the questions as completely as you can related to the vocabulary, etc., etc. And if you can see the opportunity to stick in a graph, woohoo, you should do it, because that is the key to success. I've told you before that you need to be looking for questions that lend itself to the use of graphs, and when you do that, you're going to actually improve. You're not going to just pass. Nobody's looking for a pass mark. We're looking for a good mark, and that's going to make a big difference on your final exam. Finally, you've got the essay questions, which include a 2-part structured questions. These are kind of tricky, okay? These are, essay questions that I told you about. They're looking for 4-paragraph questions where, the first paragraph is you explain the question, and then you tell us why is this an important question. Paragraph 2, you agree with the question. So if it says, do you think that, all monopolies are bad or something, and then the first thing, second paragraph is you say, yes, they are all bad, and then, because you could talk about, inefficiencies or how prices go up or services go down, but then in paragraph 3, you sort of, change it and say, well, on the other hand, maybe it's not all bad, and then you can talk about natural monopolies, etc., etc. Then bring up your own, in 4th paragraph, your own personal opinion, maybe Vietnamese examples and a graph, and if you could put that together, man, you got a 10 out of 10 with no problem at all, okay? So prepare yourself for those essay questions, okay? Prepare yourself to give a structured answer. Now, sometimes an essay question may not lend itself to a 4-paragraph answer, or the essay question may not lend itself to a graph. Usually, I'm just saying this is my opinion, but usually those are the easier questions, and they're trying to suck you in. They're trying to suck you in to answer a easy question, but which will give you very few marks. You have to sort of look for the questions. When you have a minute before you start answering, you got to read the questions, all of them. Usually they'll say answer 2 out of 5, something like that. Choose the ones that you feel lend itself to a 4-paragraph answer and lend itself to a graph, okay? And I think with that strategy, you're going to be okay. Okay. Then they go in, they talk about, you know, the multiple choice questions, some of the tips, and then the data response and the essay questions. All that is on page 276. The wording of the questions, I think that's pretty important, okay, because this is where a lot of students are confused, where the wording is all a little bit sort of confusing, and they're trying to, you know, trick you, and I think this is wrong, and they're trying to be a bit less that way than they were 10 years ago. How to avoid common pitfalls, you know. Are you answering the question? Well, that would be definitely number one. You know, are you being vague? Vague means not really getting to the point. Number three, misses the point. Are you, you know, are you sort of not using, answering the question in the context in which the question is asked, which is no application. Descriptive, no analysis of issues. So if you start getting into talking about, let's say, elasticity, you know, you can't just mention elasticity and then go on to the next topic. You need to sort of analyze that and tell us why that's really, really important. No discussion or ignores a second aspect of the question. Okay? They talk about it, they go on page 278, they talk a little bit about the diagrams and how this is incredibly important to make sure that they are relevant and that they are well labeled and that they are neatly drawn. In fact, they make a reference to the fact that a lot of graphs are just too small. Now, there is no shortage of paper on that final exam, so there is no need to draw a graph the size of a postage stamp, okay? So you need to basically, you know, draw the graph big enough so that the examiner can read the graph without, you know, using his glasses or being stressed or being angry or anything like that. And certainly what you need to do is you need to label the y and x axes before you start putting in the slopes, because if you do the slopes first and then you start putting in the x and y axes, then you're going to find that it's going to be a confusion, and the slopes will be inaccurate, etc., etc. So try to be careful with that one. Confusion over similar terms. I'm not convinced that that's too important. I don't think. Meaningless or wrongly drawn diagrams. Obviously, if you draw a graph that has nothing to do with the question, or you just think, oh, I need to stick in a graph, so I'll stick in a supply and demand graph, or I'll stick in a vertical, perfectly inelastic demand curve. I don't think you're going to get any marks, and maybe you will convince the examiner that you don't know what you're talking about at all. And so that's a very negative side to answering the questions. What else are there questions here? Do not exceed the time. I would definitely say that this is a touchy issue. I get almost every year, including the grade 12s, speak to the grade 12s, you will find that the students thought the questions were quite easy. They thought, oh man, these are okay. These questions are okay. But they ran out of time and they were angry. They were angry and frustrated, quite understandably, because they had run out of time and they were not able to complete the answers. And this comes from a bit of practice, a bit of bad planning, that you have to look and see how many questions are going to be on the paper. You need to sort of do a few practice exams before you go into it so that you know how much time each question is required. Obviously, if they're giving you 10 marks, don't just give 3 sentences and think that that's okay. That you need to look at not only the questions but the number of marks that each question requires, and then you need to respond appropriately for the marks that it offers. Okay, and then if you cannot do a particular question, leave it and move on to the next one. Yeah, I think that's probably good advice. The problem I have seen is that students who are all nervous and shaky and they're scared of what's going to happen, they skip over a question because they thought it was too difficult, and they forget to go back to it at the end, and then you lose all the marks for that question. And if you make a mistake like that, like leaving out a question, you know, that could be the difference between a sort of an A and a C, because, you know, getting a 0 on an answer because you forgot to answer the question is serious mistake. You know, you can't, as an examiner, you cannot even use creative arithmetic in order to help the student to improve his mark, because there's nothing there to mark because you forgot the question. So I would probably put a little star next to it to kind of remind me, or put a star on your hand or something when you're writing the exam to remind you to go back to that question, because you don't want to make that sort of totally disastrous mistake. And then finally, they have a little list of common mistakes that students often make. Is related to the diagrams, making sure that the labels of the axes are correctly done, that the diagrams may be too small. I've already mentioned that. Making sure that the curves are accurate, making sure that things are the graph is neatly done. A failure to use a diagram in an answer when asked to. Even if it's not asked to, if you feel that you can contribute to the totality of the answer by adding in a graph, woohoo, do it. But clearly don't just whip in a graph because you say, well, I need to have a graph. Mr. Leo says I need to put in a graph, so I'm going to put in a graph. Don't do it. It will probably do you more harm than good by putting in an irrelevant graph. So I'm going to finish there. I'm going to remind you again that I want that homework, okay? I would say there's at least 6 or 7 bits of homework that I've sent out to each of you on Google Classroom. Go over them. If you forgot about which ones, check, okay? And go over the videos, because I've added questions in there as well. But definitely the handouts that I've given, every one of them, to my knowledge, have questions at the end. And you need to actually answer each one of them, and you need to send it to me. You need to send it to me by Google Classroom. As I say, 1/3 of the students have done it, but that's not okay. You know, the other 2/3 think it's a holiday, and it's not a holiday. We need to take the rest of this term seriously. And I'm prepared to go the extra mile to help you, but you cannot be helped if you're not ready to do the extra work. It is difficult, I know. You know, doing it at home when the television's on and your brother or sister are screaming and making a lot of noise is difficult, but this is what life is all about. Sometimes there's a challenge. So I would ask you to go back through the papers that I have handed to you. Go through the videos, make sure that you have all the homework lined up, and go through it, each one, make sure that everything is complete. And then I won't have to send the names of the students to the coordinator of grade 11, okay? So I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.